Welcome to the Water People podcast, where we talk story with some of the most adept waterfolk on the planet. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. Water People is a place to acknowledge and share the aquatic experiences that shape who we become back on land. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. Today, we're in conversation with adventurer, marine scientist, and world record holder Annie Ford. Annie worked for nearly a decade as a marine environmental consultant, notably as a marine fauna observer aboard seismic blasting vessels for the oil and gas industry. She's spent time surfing and sailing around the world, including multiple expeditions to Antarctica. Today, Annie's the National Campaign Manager for the Surfrider Foundation Australia, where she's currently working to halt the largest marine seismic blasting project ever proposed. It's slated to take place off the coast of her home island of Tasmania and will emit some of the loudest human-made noises ever created, to the detriment of an entire ecosystem. We caught up with Annie as she completed a 4,000-kilometer bike ride, that's about 2,500 miles, to talk about endurance, optimism, changing careers, and her entwined commitment to kindness, climate action, and adventure. And just a quick note before we dive in, you can go into the draw to win a prize pack from our podcast partners by signing up to the Water People newsletter. The link is in the show notes here. Or you can leave the podcast a review wherever you listen. 2 ways to enter. Everyone who leaves a review or signs up for the newsletter will go into the draw to win some sweet gear. We'll choose the winners early in Water People's 6th season.
Coming out of spring into summer, there has been a wonderful wave of events put on by Patagonia and Indigenous groups working to protect people and place, and Surfrider Foundation. It seems like in the last month or so, there's been a lot of opportunity for people to come together and be lit up by each other's stories, and also well informed about any threat to their way of life in an area, their way of making a living or cultural continuation. Just a very vibrant time. And we had one of those key people, especially in the Surfrider family, Annie, come through on her bike and blow our minds.
Oh,
Lauren.
I was so inspired by Annie. She just made me want to rethink efficiency and the way we organize adulthood in terms of, I think about this a lot, having a young child, actually also having a puppy. I watched our 6-month-old puppy, Moondoggie, the way she moves, the way she frolics without any concern for efficiency of movement. You know, she does these bouncing pounces and jumps over our other dog, Yogi, with no concern for getting from A to B. And I'm always really inspired by that. You know how you do that when you're a kid? You're not thinking about, oh, and then I need to get to the shop, so I'm going to drive from here to there. And the most efficient way is to take this path. And, you know, our minds become dominated by moving with efficiency and getting shit done. And Annie came into our lives and just exploded that idea in adulthood. And she decided, as you'll hear more about soon, that instead of jumping on a plane to fly from destination to destination on this tour with the Surfrider Foundation, she was going to ride her bike, and ended up riding 4,000 kilometers, enjoying very much and also not enjoying the ride at times. But for better or worse, she is committed to adventure and the lived experience. And I wanted to ask you about that, Dave. Can you tell us a story about a time when firsthand experienced changed something inside of you?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, the lived experience. As someone who didn't really finish school and didn't go to university or anything along the lines of expanding my grey matter, I really felt that it was up to me at an early age to just accrue life experiences. And a couple of years into being a travelling surfer that wasn't following competitions and things, I was in my early 20s. I started to see that everywhere I was going, there were really serious problems in places. You'd go back to parts of Indonesia one year after another and see that it was harder and harder for people to catch fish and feed their families, or you could no longer surf in front of that river mouth because it was so toxic. Same in Japan, same in Europe, same in America, and in parts of Australia, certainly in New Zealand. And I got to a bit of a point where I was like, what can I do about this? I haven't gone to university. I don't have any academic skills to call on. I'm just a surf rat. What can I do? And at that point in our area on the North Coast, through great friend Howie Cook, lifelong artist and activist.
We have to have him on soon. This is
We
the
will.
second time
We
this
really
season
do.
you
And
mentioned
yeah,
it.
and so Howie was like, oh, hey, Dave, I got Captain Paul Watson of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society coming through. I'm feeding him up and his crew at my place tomorrow, and you should meet him. And I just thought, oh, I should actually interview him. And because I was aware of the group's work and how much of an absolute legend and deeply experienced man Paul Watson was. And so I did. I organised to interview him the next day. He came over to my place with Howie, and right before I sat down to speak with Captain Paul and basically ask him, like, what should I do? What the hell can I do with my skill set? How can I be valuable and assist your work or do things like that? I got a phone call from Steve Barilotti, who was the editor-at-large of Surfer magazine at the time. And Barlow said, Dave, how you going? What are you up to? I just want to check in, see what you got going on. What are you doing anytime soon? And I said that I was about to interview Captain Paul, and I'll call Barlow back tomorrow and I'll probably have a plan, hopefully have a plan. And so I sat down with Captain Paul, and basically he just fired me up to just get out there and really experience issues firsthand. He was speaking from experience, given that he had been on the ice floes in the Arctic Circle, standing between men with massive clubs and beautiful little white fur seals and stopping them from killing those animals. He had been between a gun and an animal many, many times in his life. And those experiences were fuel for him. They were motivators that would never leave him. And so he basically told me to do the same and to enlist the community that I was a part of. And so that's what I did. I thought, okay, wherever I can do that, I will do it. And so I jumped on with the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society's ship. I can't remember if it was the Farley Moat or the Steve Irwin, but they basically took one of their vessels from Australia all the way across the Pacific and were stopping at the Galapagos Islands to intervene with poachers who were shark finning in the marine sanctuary there. And that experience was deeply impactful. That was something I'll never, ever forget, that experience of looking at animals entangled in miles and miles of long line baited lines. And then I wanted to go to Japan, and I wanted to go to the site of Taiji Cove, and I wanted to firsthand experience culturally what the scenario was. Was this a cultural practice accepted by everyone, or were these fishermen rogues that had splintered off from their traditional honourable ways of feeding their villages and their communities? Were they now just industrialised fishermen who were carrying out these inhumane drives and kills? And so that experience was a direct experience for me that I can never, ever forget. And there's been many, many more in my life that are along those lines where safely I have been able to go to the centre of an issue or the centre of a opportunity like that it is just unforgettable, and it is, like, I don't know if this is a word, but undiminishing. It doesn't diminish that potency of that experience, and also afforded me an opportunity to be a voice within the discussion about those issues, to be able to sit with someone who's perhaps defending an industrialized, inhumane practice and ask them, well, have you been there? Have you heard the sound these animals make when they're treated that way? Have you smelt the mineral-rich, iron-scented blood in the water? Have you seen the magnitude of shark finning practices? And a lot of times the people who are on the other side of that debate will answer no. And so you've got a really powerful position there, even though you might not be an academic or someone who walks in the bureaucratic world very well. You've got a voice. And that was what I really loved with Annie, that she is someone who has the academics, actually, and she went onto the ships, onto the vessel that is seismic blasting, deploying a new technology that is incredibly violent, incredibly destructive, and incredibly single-minded for the benefit of one corporation.
At the detriment of an entire
everything,
ecosystem.
Ecosystems, fishing industries, communities. And she lived it. And she got off that vessel and got on her bike and has not looked back. And so she has a powerful voice and a wonderful voice, a happy, buoyant, you can see the purpose in her eyes. You can feel that vibrant energy in her. This is someone who is hearing all of the discussions about climate change, hearing the discussions about the destruction of communities and in other industries, and is not overwhelmed by them and sitting in a place of overwhelm without action. She is lit up and is acting on that feeling. And don't you think you could feel it? We were sitting here at this table and you could just feel that, yeah, her physical body is being put through it. She's 4,000 Ks in, about to have another big adventure, but her spirit is lit up and buoyant. And isn't that what we all want?
Annie, thank you so much for being here. We always begin these conversations in the same place by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Would you please share a story like that with us?
What a wonderful, profound question, and so many ways to move through that. I think it begins for me as a child, and the first time I was on a sailing boat. And you know how fear is contagious, and this storm brewed, and we were told to go inside, me and my friends, on this surfing trip. And the adults started to get quite stressed and the waves were coming over the boat and we were bunkering down and getting pretty scared, then realizing like this is actually pretty fun getting thrown around and then changing that narrative from this isn't scary, this is a great time. And then, you know, you tried to stand up and surf in the like little cockpit down there. And I think that was a really impactful moment in the importance of the story you tell yourself and how you can control that, and how something that can be fearful or challenging, or a lot of these experiences you don't have control over, but it's the meaning you bring to it. That has had such a profound ripple effect through life. And later in life, going through things like Vipassana, where you learnt how to do that with so much more control and intention. And so when you get to this kind of stage in life where you want to bring purpose and impact to your life, but there's things like fear of judgment, there's things like fear of opposition and putting yourself out there. As long as the story that you tell yourself and the relationship you have with yourself and the experience is grounded in joy, and time and time again out here, that's been my experience, and reminding to come back to that. It can be an absolute nightmare sometimes, or it can be an adventure.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, sailing, geez whiz, and being in the ocean in so many ways can offer a lesson like that that we bring back to our earthly life, and also carry that with us through the decades and different periods in our life. Can you give us some examples of where you've applied that?
Oof, so many. Probably the biggest one, the first big sail I did across from the Caribbean into the Pacific.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Far from Tassie.
Yeah, far. So bought a yacht in the Caribbean, and the plan was to sail back to Australia, but got distracted with other opportunities and sold it in Tahiti. But on the sail across the Caribbean, we hit this 3-day storm. And with storms, you cannot switch them off. So sailing is the best teacher of patience and acceptance, because you can't escape, you can't teleport. And I think carrying that lesson forward of it is what it is, and you can either look at the waves or you can, go downstairs and, chill out and read a book and do your best to get through the next, 72 hours of getting thrown around and hoping and praying your boat survives the storm. There's a few moments out there, one in Antarctica as well, where you're having to go outside and I've lost feeling in my fingers from one of those experiences. Just
Still to right now?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Just the temperatures, and if things go wrong. I still remember looking out at this canal entrance, the Beagle Canal, down south. And if we didn't make it there within the next 3 hours, we were about to get nailed with, I think it was 60 to 70 knots of wind, and would have to go back out to sea. So there was no safe anchorage until you get deep inside, and having to rip the sails, and some very, very close calls. It's a phenomenal teacher, and you don't have control to make it out of a few of those experiences. I remember thinking, every grey hair and every wrinkle I get, I will be forever grateful for. Age is a privilege. And some of those experiences certainly thought it was the end.
What were you doing sailing near to Antarctica?
I was a Antarctic scientist on board expedition yachts. So we took tourists on expeditions around the Antarctic Peninsula and operated as a watercraft operator. So, you go and show them penguins and go lasso icebergs for the G&Ts.
Wow.
But it was wild. It's wild that was a phase of life for a few years. And
Few years, wow. And were you leaving from the bottom of Australia or from South America?
South America.
Yeah.
So a couple of seasons over there.
Wow.
And then I really like the warm weather as well. So went back to the...
Yeah, that's not the right place for that preference.
Bit of both. Absolutely phenomenal place on Earth, though. And seeing those environments with your own eyes and feeling them, and the contrast you can get on a single planet. Oh, how can you not do everything in your power to take care of that? It's a wonderful opportunity. If you ever get the chance, make sure you experience that.
Speaking of doing everything you can to protect the planet, you've just cycled 4,000 kilometers. I'd love to begin there again, please. Why? Why and for what purpose?
Oh, goodness. Bike riding is phenomenal. I've always... Oh, not always. I've only picked up a bike in the last 5 years. So
wow.
When you do, you realise there's so many directions you can take it. I entered the mountain biking world and decided to mountain bike through New Zealand, and I didn't know how long it would take, because I was just going to, instead of flying the length of New Zealand, I was like, just ride it. And picked up my surfboard as well, because I didn't know how long it would take, and I thought I'd miss surfing. So I towed my surfboard behind my mountain bike for the tip of New Zealand and surfed and mountain biked along the way. But that experience changed how I want to travel, and the immersive experience of riding and smelling and hearing and meeting people in cafes. There's no better way. And that slow travel where we seem to be in a rush everywhere. But I've took that same mentality to this current adventure, which is I'm now with Surfrider Foundation Australia, and we've just made a documentary film about seismic blasting in our southern seas and raising awareness about what seismic blasting is, and to tour that film along Tasmania and the east coast of Australia just presented this wonderful opportunity to jump back on the bike. And I begged and pleaded with the Surfrider Foundation crew to, hey guys, rather than me flying or driving between each event, could I ride it and hopefully generate a bit of momentum with the ride? And I'll do daily updates and try my best to do the hard sell, which I'm terrible at, and self-promotion. And they said yes, they 100% support and get behind me, and what do I need and how can they help? And what kind of workplace does that? To let you just have free reign and support and kindness the whole way through. So between each screening location, I've been riding my remarkable bike, and God, you could never plan for what's to come. It is a wild world out there, but Australia and the diversity of landscapes and experiences and people and cultures and cities and regional areas. I just had the privilege of going from the southernmost point of Australia to the easternmost point of Australia via Noosa. And the experiences that relate to care of these landscapes. I feel so connected to Australia right now, and what I got to see out there, it just is so moving. And the people were leaving me snacks along the way, and they knew I was about to come through their town, and they put a little sign up like "Snacks for Annie."
How wonderful.
I was so incredible. And by this stage, with the awareness raised of the ride, people were about 50 offers in Byron of, do you need accommodation? Do you need a car? Do you need a surfboard? Do you need a mountain bike? Do you need a tour guide? People are phenomenal and gravitational, and the opportunities that have come from this crazy idea. Like the first few days, like, what have I done? What have I signed up for?
It really is crazy because, not crazy, but wonderfully crazy, because when you think about a film tour or something of this nature, you're usually planning in terms of efficiency. How many places can we get to? How quickly? How many people can we get through the door to transmit this important and meaningful message? And you just flip that on its head. And I love that.
I love that it worked. It was such a roll of the dice, and the faith that the team had in me, because fortunately we also had, people that helped along with the tour. We have an amazing tour manager, Kai, and Drury McPherson with my campaign director. They just picked up the limitation of capacity that I, injected with the choice to ride. And some of those days I was pretty tired pulling in, and, but we had a work meeting, and I committed to make sure that work didn't suffer and the tour didn't suffer because of the shift in allocation of my energy. But thankfully, media outlets started to pull out of nowhere, and fortunately we've got an amazing PR company that has helped along the ride, and they just, they're everywhere I went. It was interview after interview after interview, and then meetings and studio, like live studio events, shaking with nerves because I'm not a public speaker, but learning on the job and learning out there. And it's so easy to put that, like that brick of fear and ego well down the building blocks, and the purpose is the leader. And that's so easy when you live and breathe and wholeheartedly care about an issue like seismic blasting, to just everything else falls away. You fall away. It's bigger than you. And that's out there on the ride when, you've got, there was like a leg of 700 kilometres in 3 days through headwinds and heat from Melbourne to Canberra. And when you're out there and your hands are so painful, and your bum is like,
your bum on a bike seat.
You have no idea.
Do you have a really comfortable one, and does it not even matter after a while?
It doesn't matter how comfortable it is. After the first day, like 250 Ks in, I was like, oh no, this is going to be excruciating, and there's no way you can sit. And I've tried every possible way. Yeah. And again, that acceptance, like you can't do anything about it unless you want to jump. And there was no option. I was seeing it through. Yeah. And you can do anything for that amount of time if you really put your mind to it. But just that grind, and also your body just, once there's acceptance of this is going to be hard, you can almost it's okay. And as part of it, and it almost like you go through those phases and barriers, and then it disappears for a while and it pops up again, and the overwhelming barriers broken through of what you can do with your body and your mind while in an amazing environment, and people are coming out from nowhere to support you because they're following along, and to think how that might have inspired even one person to do something or adventure or bring purpose to their life or lifestyle, that's worth it. And to think what like people have been saying and the shift of lifestyle, or that they've now written to their MP or stood up for this topic as well, like that it makes it, it's easy. Like your body heals.
Yep.
Except my fingers. Like they need a bit more
maybe
time.
your bum too. Maybe your fingers and your bum they'll be hanging out somewhere with sensation, but forevermore you won't be feeling those things. It's just what you go through though when you put through when you have like a goal like yours, like you said, the body heals and adapts. And I think that experience too of adaptation is something really interesting, because we're talking about that on a large scale right now too. The adaptation of our current modern culture is a crucial aspect of how we are going to right certain wrongs and heal certain illnesses, both personally, politically, publicly. And so when you're writing, are all these things swirling around in your head? Are you listening? Do you have your headphones on? Are you listening to stuff, or are you writing without that kind of thing? Like, what's the conversation in your head when you are in the trenches like that, when you're back in that little cabin in the boat as an 8-year-old getting tossed around and you could either choose to freak out or to front up?
I remember 10 years ago, and I saw so much trash in the ocean. I genuinely said to the person I was sailing with, the world is stuffed, we might as well have fun. I cannot believe that came out of my mouth ever. But if at any point we threw in the towel and gave up, like we could have done that at any point in history, but us humans are so phenomenally solutions oriented. And while out there and you've got trucks and cars and you see what's traveling across the country in terms of shipping or getting carried from city to city, and the allocation of energy resources to make that happen, and here you are having the time of your life on your little bike and pushing it to make it happen. Like, it's not an easy thing to do, and some days are really hard to get out of bed and see that next 100, 200, 300 kilometres through in the day. You can't not question, what are we doing when we know better? We have phenomenal research in this space. We know that we are on a trajectory that is unacceptable if we value our current lifestyle on this planet and where we live and what we can consume and how we can live our lives. If we value that, we have a responsibility to do something about it. And there are solutions at hand right now, whether that is as simple as jumping on your bike, whether that is what you consume, whether that is just having a conversation about what you care, but then taking that emotion and doing something about it is the next step. And it's just whatever your capacity is, and we all have different capacities. Fortunately, like this idea, I had the support to see it through, but it feels good to do something about the remarkable injustices that are happening despite knowledge of those impacts. To then get active, you find your people, you find your community.
Crucial, right?
Oh,
to have that like-mindedness.
Essential. And I've never felt like I've belonged more. And no one is out there riding next to me. Like that, I'm literally the only person I met riding a distance like that. I know it's not the easiest option to do, but when you start living in alignment with your actions and values, it's profoundly moving for others to have that bar in place and then to reflect on what we can do as individuals. And it's literally the little choices every day And there's so many ways to do that.
How did you get to this place? The whispers are that you used to work
Ooh, good.
in the oil and gas industry. So I was so curious to find out how you made that transition and why. Was there a turning point, a particular moment where you could no longer tell yourself a story to work in that industry?
Great question. And like I mentioned, I can't believe I ever had the mentality of dismissal. Like, oh, it's already damaged. There's nothing I can do as a human, just one person. And while offshore, working in the offshore oil and gas industry, on these seismic vessels as a marine fauna observer, I went out there to protect the whales. You know, I was out there to stop the impacts and to make sure that they weren't impacted. And I really believed that I was part of the solution and that I could make change from within that industry. And then I started to scratch the surface and do my own research, and realizing that narrative that I'd been told out there of, oh, this doesn't impact marine species. There's no evidence to show that there's any impacts. And I just learned that there had been no research done. And what had been done was...
So they actually weren't wrong. They weren't lying.
No. Like, there hadn't been any impacts shown because they hadn't done the research. And the research that had been done almost entirely had been funded by the fossil fuel industry and the lobby groups. So the research was structured and designed in a way to tell a story. And once you can see, you can't unsee. I had these conversations in the offshore industry, starting to question the people alongside me. They're like, oh, we're not the problem. It's the consumers. We're just providing the resource. They want it. And I remember talking to my phenomenal friend, Jack O'Hare, and he said, what if everyone said no? And my excuse out there at that time was, if I don't do it, someone else will do it and probably do a worse job. They won't care as much. And he was like, what if every marine biologist said no, they couldn't go ahead? I was like, what a great way of thinking. And so I said no. And I told them why I wasn't going to accept the opportunities and contracts anymore. And I started making a bit of noise about it, just on my own social media platforms, and hey guys, that this is happening. But no one knew what seismic blasting was.
When was this, Annie?
This was, about 5 years ago now. I decided to stop working and then making
which is a huge personal sacrifice and change in terms of probably having a comfortable income.
Yeah.
That was probably a major transition for you.
And friends, and especially the defensiveness that comes with stepping out and people thinking you're attacking them. And I understand that there's different value systems, and some people need to put food on the table and need that secure income, or their money is the highest value. Whereas for me, I was soon learning that it wasn't mine. And without a clean water and clean air and diverse, healthy ecosystems, none of it matters. Like we depend on the environment that we have the privilege to call home, this remarkable planet. And so taking that step away, Surfrider heard about me doing my little, I'd step up to the bat and then I wouldn't really swing. I'd be like, and it's bad. It's not very good. And please, I was so scared I was operating in this system of what's going to get me liked.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to rock the boat. I was like, I remember being such a people pleaser. And to go against the grain was so uncomfortable after not being a controversial person or avoiding conflict at any opportunity. And so that decision and then the actions, fortunately, I had some amazing people kind of take me under the wing and listen, and then help me raise that voice. And this particular seismic blasting proposal was dropped a couple of years ago off the Tasmanian coastline, and it stretches along the Victorian coastline to the South Australian border. It's the biggest seismic blasting proposal in history ever. And I had imposter syndrome when I went up to speak about this. Like, how could I possibly influence a choice on this? But who better? After experience the industry, understanding the language, knowing how to do research and how to analyze the science, and then quite unwillingly speaking about it because I'm getting better. I realized how valuable your voice is, and that one person can genuinely change the trajectory of an entire country. But it starts with one. And if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Like, it's incredibly like cliche, but I've genuinely experienced that, and how empowering it is to take that courage and say what you believe, and then realizing that there is a mass of people that will jump on board to reason. And they just need to know. And I have every faith in humanity that people are inherently good, but they need the information to make an informed decision. And what we are fighting out there is billions of dollars of lobbying to the government and media. And we are just for example, Surfrider Foundation, we're tiny. There's 3.5 of us at the national level trying to spread this campaign. Thank God we've got a small army of volunteers because it's watching us move the pin. And when people hear about what seismic blasting is, they are shocked and mortified that this is happening.
I think this is a really good time to actually go into an audio experience for our listeners. We're going to play a little bit of whale song, and then we'll let you hear what the seismic blasts sound like if you were underwater.
So everyone who just listened to that has access to that file. So if you want to reach out to us and play that at your school where you have marine studies as a subject, which I did, it was about the only thing I paid attention to in school, and you're a teacher or you're a student, request that you play this in your school. If you have any kind of gathering happening where presenting the nature of this violent technology to your fellow earthling, and those of us especially along these coastlines that'll be directly impacted by that kind of technology, please do so. Just reach out and we'll flick it to you and make sure that proliferates. And I think, Annie, when you were talking about this, the experience of being on the boat, you speak to this in the Southern Blast film, which is a great short film. I'm sure people have access to that pretty soon too, as another tool to rally each other. When you're on film and we see you speaking about being on the boat and your role watching for whales, watching for wildlife that would be impacted by this technology, and then a moment for you where I guess what I'm interested in is that feeling of outrage and concern and real perhaps frustration at that experience. How did you then transform that into this effervescent person we have sitting on the other side of the table where you can cope with that? Because I think that's a really important thing in these times right now, is coping with looking at these situations face to face and really paying attention to them, though not sinking, feeling how you can swim through these sort of situations. So how are you doing that? How did you do it then, and how do you keep doing it?
It's so overwhelming to be confronted with the enormity of some of these issues. It feels like you're moving a mountain uphill. But goodness me, getting active is the cure, without a doubt. And through that action and the energy of the people that I am surrounded by, people that are not apathetic, they are doing something about it. And with that comes this inherent optimism. Like, I am shamelessly optimistic that we can tackle this because we've seen it. We've seen these proposals be knocked over. We saw it with Fight for the Bite. We're seeing it with PEP 11 at the moment. People power is a real thing, and we have the fortune of living in a democracy where your voice matters by this very structure, but it doesn't work unless you use it. And I understand that there is a lot of hope lost in these current political systems, and it does feel overwhelming and often quite heavy and depressing. But there is no better feeling. Like, I've just had the time of my life pairing everything I love doing. I get to surf, mountain bike, or ride and deliver a message. And I could have just turned my back on that and gone traveling or stayed in the industry. There's something karmic about what we do with our time. And I did not feel good out there facilitating seismic blasting. But my gosh, I would never expected to sit on this podcast and be talking about this issue that I feel deeply about. And I cannot encourage everyone more. If you care about something and if this doesn't speak to you, that's okay. We all have our own part to play, but listen to what angers you or what inspires you. And it doesn't just fall in your lap. It comes from that being active and showing up. Without showing up, it's like surface dwelling. There's no deep dives.
This is such an important message. Annie, you're really speaking to the heart of how we make meaningful lives. You listen to those peaks of interest, follow the threads of curiosity, and that can deliver us to these peak moments that you're talking about. Before, you mentioned being supported by this great community, but you are also supported by the science. It's so different than a few years ago when you're speaking about there not being definitive science about the impacts of seismic testing. Can you talk us through the science, where it is now, and the real impacts on marine species?
Absolutely. It's so encouraging knowing we're on the right side of history. Like, this is a finite resource. It's the most dangerous experiment ever to continue to drill and extract and burn these fossil fuels. This particular proposal is searching for gas. So gas is actually methane.
What's the proposal called?
Yeah, it's called a seismic survey, and the proponent is TGS, a Norwegian company, and Schlumberger, or SLB, they've recently renamed, and they're an Australian company. And they're proposing to seismic blast 45,000 square kilometres of ocean. It's almost as big as Tasmania. And those blasts refract off the different layers of the seabed to find oil and gas reservoirs. That blast is louder than an atomic bomb. It's one of the loudest man-made noises on the planet, and it can be heard across oceans. So those in Australia are heard in Antarctica, and every single species that has been studied in our southern seas is impacted by this. Keeping in mind, not many species have yet been studied. So about 13 years ago, 2010, there was a mass die-off of scallops after a seismic blasting survey off Lake Entrance. And the fishing industry could make a clear connection with the seismic survey. So they catalysed research, and the fishing industry injected a whole bunch of money into surveying scallops, crayfish. We've got recently had octopus and zooplankton as well as a side study. Now, the research from those studies showed, first of all, scallops have a dose-dependent mortality, which means the more seismic they're exposed to, the more are found to die, whether that's 1 pass or 2 passes or 4 passes. Not only that, with crayfish, they lose their balance, their statuses, their human inner ear equivalent. The little hairs on them that used to detect pressure are completely obliterated. So that affects their ability to escape from predators, and they're built on their escape mechanism. It's what makes them so tasty. But as one of the most important studies for me was an assessment on zooplankton, and this was only over 2 days, and it hasn't been replicated. The researchers found that with each seismic blast, a hole in the biomass of zooplankton was opening up after it had passed through. And so all krill in those surveys were found to be killed, and zooplankton completely obliterated. So zooplankton are the foundation of marine food chains everywhere. And if you start to impact the base of these food chains, they can have very prolific impacts throughout that chain. And before that research had been done, the seismic blasting companies assumed a 10-metre impact. But the research showed that over a kilometre was being impacted and getting killed. 1.2 kilometres was the extent of the survey. They didn't go further than that, but everything up to 1.2 kilometres, orders of magnitude.
So maybe beyond that.
Absolutely, but it hasn't been replicated. So we don't know.
How pervasive is the use of this technology? Is it a recent technology, or is this happening all over the world in the ocean?
It is happening everywhere. So fortunately, some countries are banning it. It's been banned in New Zealand. And it is unfortunately very used within the oil and gas industry. And that's their defence, is that we've been doing this forever and there's no impacts, but they haven't been doing the research to find them. Yep. So it's easy to say that there's no impacts when they're not investing in it, or they're not allowing scientists on board to do the research. These vessels cost $500,000 a day to operate, a day.
Wow.
No scientist, no university no independent researcher can possibly afford access. These scientists need to work in collaboration. And whose interest is it in to say no? Oh, it's too hard. We can't look at other technology. We can't allow you on board. It's geared. It's so heavily geared towards seismic blasting companies and has been for so long. They've gone unchecked and unchallenged. But having seen this practice for myself, having heard this practice and having had my bed shaken at night with the refraction, and hearing from King Island, people's windowsills are shaking. It's unacceptable. And finally, there's been light shone on this industry and they can't hide over the horizon anymore. We're bringing it into people's homes through this remarkable documentary. And I have every hope and every confidence that with knowledge, this is outdated. We don't need gas anymore. We absolutely can transition away from this. It makes no sense environmentally, economically. These profits go offshore, or for future generations. On every level, this is intolerable.
So right now, Annie, the testing, what is happening in the water right now down south? Is there anyone out there blasting? Is there a date where things are going to ramp up or begin? Like if you were to go down to anywhere from the Otways south, would you encounter anyone from this industry going out of any ports going out to do this?
Currently, no, but they're all in the process of getting approved. So right now we are waiting on whether the regulator, NOPSEMA, approve. There's two that are currently in the pipeline. This TGS one, the biggest on the planet, and one in closer to the 12 Apostles, just off the shore of the surf coast there. We are awaiting. So whether that gets approved, whether that gets knocked back, it won't get knocked back, I can guarantee. Or third, whether they are forced to resubmit their proposal with major or minor amendments, because we just had these proposals available to the public to be commented on. So we only had 1 month as the public to make comments on this ridiculously enormous proposal. It was 1,400 pages and only 30 days to comment. Even as a marine scientist, that was so hard. It was I cannot believe the authors of that with scientific credentials can manipulate the findings of research so much to their agenda. It's like they didn't go past the abstract, obviously very agenda driven, but we're seeing in that 30 days, we saw over 30,000 submissions in opposition or directly needing further information or complete lack of acceptance of it. So that shows that there's a groundswell of movement against these proposals. People are becoming aware and they're not okay with it.
It's so fantastic that you all with Surfrider are so active on that level of mobilising the public, and then also taking that to the MPs and taking it to the political system. What comes to my mind when you were just mentioning the $500,000 a day kind of vessel fee or expense, the cost for them to do that, makes me really think that it'd be great. Everyone who has their skis down south for riding big waves, towing in or safety, and everyone who has a boat that they like to go fish from or dive from or operate commercially could perhaps just somehow get in the way of those boats when they're out to sea and stall that, because that is a very effective strategy when it comes to caring for country and people and animals. And we've seen that in blockades around the country, where if you can stall that company for as long as you can, every day is a big loss of their most cherished item, the dollar. And then that is an opportunity, another window for the people who are shareholders or part of that company to go, what's going on here? How come we just had this loss? What? Oh, there are people there who don't back what we're doing. How interesting. And so it's a really great strategy. So I would really urge anyone to think of what they have available to themselves. And if you are a surf rat like us and maybe you don't have the skills to be in your local chambers or go to the politicians and speak that language, use the skills and the language you have with being a water person, a coastal person. So I'd like the idea of that to go out, that we have an opportunity when these things happen, even if it's at that final line, like that last moment, and they're deploying ships or they're deploying earth-moving equipment, whatever it is, there is still an opportunity, and a great opportunity in that moment. And we had Yaren Bundle from down south, SOPEC group, saying that. She said, we need boats, we need people. So if it does get to that level, we can do that. So, I'm glad you said that.
What are the regulations that those vessels have to abide by in terms of human presence?
Great question. So those seismic blasting vessels, they will put out a notice to mariners to vacate the area. They obviously have limited ability to move. They drag streamers behind the boat that are about 7 to 10 kilometres long. So they are taking up an enormous footprint. And they can't move in any way, shape or form efficiently. So vessels that enter that area, there's support boats around the seismic vessel that they'll be trying to get them out of the way. I've never seen it done, personally. So I actually don't know what that looks like in terms of regulation, but my goodness, it would put a cog in the works, that's for sure.
Yeah, and this is something that's interesting to talk about, because we can all get so fired up with these passions and this level of concern for an issue like this, and we can sometimes think that the angle that we're operating from and towards is going to be the most effective angle, and we should all pull our resources into that specific angle, that type of action. And really it is a broad, diverse range of approaches that wins in the end. And, you've got people like Wayne Lynch, great surfing legend from that very coastline, speaking at some of the events that have been happening around the coast on this issue. And he's referring to the tipping point when it was the Vietnam War and people turning out on the streets from every walk of life that changed the perception of that war. And he was a famous draft dodger. When he got conscripted, he went feral and went bush as protest to that. He didn't want to participate in that. And he speaks of being spat at and sworn at and just really treated like shit because of his decision and his actions. And then it just tipping. And so I like to think of those sort of stories, and then the stories of like the fight for the bite and how much of a good time everyone had with their children, with their grandparents turning out to participate. And I would like to imagine that this seismic blasting threat will galvanise and bring together our coastal communities in a similar way, though it will be different, and it's always different. And we perhaps might like to think of what worked last time and we just apply that again. And that is actually a great thing to do, though also many other ways to do it, like riding your bike.
Absolutely. I was just going to say there's who would have thought riding a bike would raise awareness about seismic blasting? Yeah. But it's brought on an entirely different, very vocal demographic that are now engaged and watching and participating in this fight. And you're right, like we're holding paddle outs on the front line of this, and Torquay and Warrnambool in January next year. They will be huge, both in Tasmania as well. And we will be beating the drum on this issue until we see a line through it. And you're right, whether you're a fisherman or a recreational boater, whether you love walking the beach, whether any element of the ocean speaks to you, we are all impacted by this, but only they will be impacted by stopping it.
Yeah.
We need to stand up and show up though.
Yeah.
And without that action, it will go on as a status quo as it always has. But we can stop this, and I do believe we will.
How can people get involved if they're far away, if they can't, if they're not near local waters to be able to participate in paddle outs?
Absolutely. So if you're in Australia, we've got a really effective letter writing tool on the Surfrider website, so surfrider.org.au, and it takes 45 seconds and will send a letter to your MP and the Federal Resources Minister. She, Madeleine King, is the only person that has direct influence over the regulator and can pull this off in one sentence. She could stop this. The next layer is education and showing this screening far and wide, like educating about seismic blasting. We've got a petition, we've got a citizens declaration. If you can't show up to a paddle out, donate to the amazing groups that are working on this. There's so many on the front lines and that are struggling to keep the lights on. We've just got, again, 3.5 people, but to see the waves that small group can make with volunteer effort. If you've got time, volunteer it. We need every single skill set on this, whether it's photography, graphic design, whether you're an accountant, economist, whatever you need to make a business run, so too do charities. And they desperately need help. And unfortunately, it's not going to stop without rallying together. But we're seeing that. We're seeing this enormous movement and people walking out of these screenings inspired, motivated. What can I do? Like, where can I direct this energy? And we've had 5,000 letters sent in the last couple of months through this screening. But if we can send, 10, 15,000, we're going to Canberra. And with that kind of backing, we know that these parliamentarians, their people are speaking to them. It's being talked about in these party rooms. And these decisions are top down, but it only comes through representation at the ground level from the people and from voices.
And it seems like quite a localized issue to the Southern Sea, but setting a legislative precedent like this could be impactful no matter where you are in the world if your coastline is being threatened by this technology. Where are the other sites where seismic blasting is being used?
Yeah, it's also being used recently for a process called carbon capture and storage, which is this theory, because it hasn't been proven with any kind of scientific robustness, that they capture the carbon and then they put it into these reservoirs underneath the sea, and they pressurize those old wells, those depleted wells, to enhance the oil recovery so they can get the last of their oil and gas out of them. Those sites where they've proposed or implementing carbon capture and storage, there's one up in Europe. They are the most seismic blasted sites on the planet because you need to constantly check in those reservoirs. So it's not only oil and gas extraction, but also this carbon capture and storage, which is a complete farce. And we need to be looking at the source as more so than the sink. Europe, America, like a lot of coastlines that this practice is continuing. However, with awareness, this is enormously shifting. And again, for decades, this has been going on where people didn't know about it. The language used was really limiting.
Yeah, what was the language they used to use? Acoustic something?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I had to call it an acoustic survey. I could not use the word blast ever. And we weren't allowed to say air gun. It was called the source. And It's a joke, isn't it?
The source.
The source.
Wow.
Yeah. So the source was
trippy.
emitting an acoustic signal. The language is powerful, and these groups are very well versed in making sure that they dilute attention and fear and inflammation. I couldn't talk about where I was going on these boats or what I was even flying to when I was flying to them, what I'd just done, what I'd seen. You couldn't take video or photo out there. And to think back now what I witnessed with, a fin whale, one of the biggest whales on the planet, popping up right next to the vessel, and the damage has been done. Like, that's the first time I saw it, let alone the many whales that you see that don't pass the criteria for a shutdown. You only shut down within 500 metres of the vessel. But these blasts are travelling across these oceans, deafening and masking whale calls. Incredibly important for their communication, navigation, feeding.
We haven't talked about the impact on marine mammals yet.
Absolutely. So only marine mammals have that mitigation in place, so as a marine mammal observer. But again, only whales. So in very rare circumstances, you'd get a turtle, like they'd mitigate for turtles, but good luck spotting a turtle from 500 metres away. And the environmental conditions you need to see either a whale or a turtle. Like, you can only see what's on the surface, nothing underneath. You can't see behind you. There's only ever one of you on shift. And at night, who can see then? No one. And so this is designed and completely well designed for the industry to continue its practice. It's flawed on every level, and there is no attempt to improve these practices. They're void of environmental referrals from the EPBC Act. It's horrific that there is so much power that has been placed on these companies and their decision-making skills, but that's changing now.
I can imagine some people are listening and a skeptical part of their brain is going, well, we all use oil and gas, so is there some value in continuing to search for it, to supplement our usage? What else are we going to do?
Great.
How do we transition away from using these substances?
Really important question and really important conversation. We do all use oil and gas. It's in our clothes. It's in how we feed ourselves. It's how we transport. Just because it is the way things are right now should not deter us from wanting to have better use of shared resources, less impactful processes, and striving to make change. If we're not frozen in time, we can adapt. I've seen it. We've seen it just in our lifetimes. There's huge shifts in the right direction. But you're right. At the moment, we have a broken system, and I can't get from A to B sometimes without flying. And a lot of people remain silent because they don't want to be called a hypocrite. And so they don't want to speak out and put their neck out. Like, it is a means to an end sometimes. If the benefit of jumping on that plane, driving that car outweighs the cost, it's okay. This is a system where we need a change. But that shouldn't be enough to deter us from demanding change. And where we can make an impact individually, whether it's, changing who you bank with or where your super is, because a lot of those are investing in these oil and gas companies right now, whether it's, again, like choosing a different mode of transport, or do I really need to go across the planet, or can I offset that in a meaningful way? There's a lot of greenwashing these days. But when I look at the conversation around especially Australia and this gas-led recovery that is so pushed by these very effective lobby groups, 80% of the gas we extract here in Australia goes offshore, and 95% of the major oil and gas companies in Australia are foreignly owned. So that money is not staying in Australia. The taxes and royalties are nil, almost nil for most. There is, again, no way that this makes sense on any level. Yes, we use it, but we need to be transitioning out. And because we use it, shouldn't be a reason for us not to.
This is a bit of a tangent. There's been some rumor amongst people we know about the push for wind energy and wind infrastructure. And I feel like there are misconceptions around this technology being used for the implementation of wind infrastructure. Is that true? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. And my focus and energy has been so targeted on the oil and gas industry and this seismic blasting because the impacts are greater than the proposals in the wind development space. And this is an important conversation. For example, there is seabed assessments to do wind farm developments. The depth of those assessments are between like tens of meters to maximum hundreds of meters maximum. Seismic blasting for oil and gas is 20 kilometers deep. So the scale of impact, noise, like the decibel level, the impact to marine systems is completely different. And look what they're searching for. It's a fossil fuel that will drive further climate degradation.
Yeah.
Whereas we do need desperately these transitions and different sources of energy. So currently, for me personally, and I can only speak from a personal, I understand no matter what we do in the ocean scape, there's going to be impacts with development. But currently, seismic blasting in the oil and gas industry impacts far outweigh the wind farm developments. So I choose to pick my battles here. And honestly, I haven't seen a proposal yet from a wind farm development. They're still years away. We don't know what the environmental impacts are, so I can't provide an informed response to many of these comments. And in saying that, a lot of misinformation is currently being spread in the offshore wind development space, driven by the oil and gas industry. There is a huge lobby group.
And their concern for marine mammals, which is just
absolutely
in the worst way.
It's the first time I've heard them care about marine mammals is in offshore wind, that they're killing the whales. And please show me any research that hasn't been funded by the oil and gas industry that shows me that. I have not seen that, and I cannot theorise how that would be so. There is operational noise, and there is a zone, a very spatially limited zone that there is operational noise. But again, in comparison to seismic blasting at the oil and gas level, incomparable. And I need to allocate my resources and energy and skill set to that industry because it far outweighs that of wind.
It's an important nuance in the conversation because we are animals. We impact our environment. We change the world that we live in. That's what it means to live within an ecosystem. But there's scale and there's breadth and depth that's worth looking at in detail to compare, like you said.
Absolutely. And there can be mutually beneficial relationships too. So one of the things I've been thinking about while riding out here is, what does it mean to reduce your impact? So my bike, there is an impact to create that. But after 700, I did the calculation, 700 kilometres, it's offset. So the carbon required to make that is offset. After I don't drive it, I ride 700 Ks. But you're absolutely right. There's impacts.
Please stay tuned while we take a quick break to acknowledge the folks who help make our podcast possible.
If the first 50 years were an experiment,
to prove that a business could be
responsible
and successful,
turns out it's not just possible,
it's profitable.
So what's next?
What's next is simple. It's human-powered, and it's finding the joy in doing difficult things.
What's next is turning capitalism on its head
and putting all our money where our mouth is.
What's next is unstoppable.
Thanks to Patagonia for their continued support this season and for prioritizing purpose over profit to protect our wondrous planet, our only home. Sanuk has been advocating for a more playful and inclusive surfing culture for more than 2 decades while crafting some of the comfiest footwear around. Thanks for your support, Sanuk, and for encouraging water people around the globe to protect their happy places. Learn more about Sanuk's partnership with the Surfrider Foundation at sanuk.com.
I feel like right now there's this interest in especially the surfing world, of extracting ourselves from extractive industries, specifically the petrochemical industry, and doing that wherever we can, considering our addiction to surfing, our fiendish addiction to surfing, and that we're not going to give it up. And so what can we give up? And that is this relationship, this long and dark relationship to petrochemicals, where we see when surfing was adopted by Californians from Hawaiian-Californian interaction, 100 years ago, it just so happened that most of the young kids who picked up surfing in Southern California were the children of aeronautics and military industrial complex employees. So there was Bob Simmons, who created twin fins and all these amazing surfboards, that was designing planes for the military. And boats and all kinds of people in Southern California.
Wetsuits too, come from
Wetsuits
military
especially.
technology.
And then we look at our dependence on weather forecasting technology that all comes from the military complex out of there. And so we have this long history as surfers, as divers as well, sailors too, I'm sure, fishers, that have this real dependency on petrochemical use. And so right now, what is hopefully redeeming and exciting about the surfing organism is that we have two surfers who have been on this podcast who created the documentary The Big Sea about neoprene and the way neoprene is made and where it comes from in Cancer Alley in Louisiana in America, and that we have other alternatives to neoprene for us to wrap ourselves up and be warm while we surf in all of these places where we all seem to have a real draw to Arctic circles and southern oceans and whatnot. Great surf. So that is a really wonderful thing that is starting to grow in the surfing organism, and that'll stretch out to other areas. Surfing is rather influential, I would like to say, in popular culture. When things happen in surfing, they can really trickle out to other areas. And then we look at surfboards. There's a lot of work to be done there, but there are people pursuing ways to get out of that dependence on that technology. So I think this comes back to what we were just talking about choosing what it is you focus on, understanding that within certain systems, the options are somewhat limited, and we will do our best with what we can do. When you think about your rides and your bike, and I love what you just said about how when you get on your bike, you pedal 700 Ks, and that offsets the work that was done to construct your bike. Moving forward, how do you feel you can prioritize those sort of decisions? Like, you obviously have the option of food. It's something we do every day. There's 20,000 odd kilometres attached to every food basket coming out of shops in Australia. What does your priority system look like when you think about, just that balance of your daily life and decisions you can make in your personal circle?
I love this question, and I've thought so much about this out here because, again, you don't want to just live in your tiny little I could so happily do that out in Whoop Whoop and just surf and ride and not try and tackle this really big, complex issue. And it's the elephant in the room, like travel, diet in the age of climate change. Like, what is the right answer? And fortunately, we're seeing remarkable research in this space to help us guide our decision-making process. So recently, I had to travel down to a Patagonia event in Torquay, and I had this utter moral dilemma of I've just ridden from there. How do I get back there? And I couldn't ride back because I couldn't make the events in time. So my layering of thinking, for example, was, okay, can I get an electric vehicle from here? That's probably the easiest in terms of it was still a big drive, but doable. Unfortunately, I couldn't. Oh, no, the first layer was the train. I tried to get the train first, but they were all booked out. It's a very last-minute trip. So the train, then the EV came into question, whether I could get one and get to and fro between events quick enough. Couldn't do that either. I can't remember why. I think it was the expense and limited funds. And then third was offsetting the flight and an offset option that I approved of. And so that's the choice I took to attend the event. But above all is, do I really need to be there? And having a really good, honest look at the answer there, because often impact won't outweigh, positive impact won't outweigh the negative. But in this case, to share this message, again, with a broken system, my values judgment was, yes, this message, while it's getting so momentous, I need to help share this message. And yes, I am utilising fossil fuels to stop fossil fuel usage. There's inherent hypocrisy in this. But that conversation is important to have because without it, we're like, how vulnerable is this to be sharing that, like, yes, I wholeheartedly understand that there's no perfect way through this.
And that's where we all are. We're all in this. There's no perfect panacea as we transition to a better way.
And when I look forward, is it just one big flight per year? Because, gosh, right now with the demands of attendance at events around the nation, working in a national branch, I could do 40, 50 flights a year to attend and share this message. But no, I will do my absolute best to minimise wherever possible. I think this trip in particular was 8 flights I was going to need to take. So 0, but then 1 surprise one for an event. And then diet, you got 3 times a day. You can really reduce and localise, eat healthy and fuel your body. And gosh, like there's so many things that resonate from an unhealthy lifestyle and the cost that will have later in life. But I don't have a perfect answer for you. And I think that's part of why we need to be talking about this. And right now, that's being avoided. I can't find a book on it. I've been looking for a book on travel in the age of climate change because that's a big, big one.
It's an important conversation, especially as water people who love to experience the world. We love to adventure. It is baked into what it means to be a surfer in many ways, historically anyway. So what tool do you use to offset your travel? And do you think travel, even for the sole purpose of adventure and exploration and personal enrichment, is validated?
Great question again with perspective. I remember, growing up in Tasmania, you're surrounded by old growth forests and beautiful, abundant landscapes. And I thought the whole world was like that. Little did I know, only after traveling, that what we have there is so precious, not just Tasmania, but throughout Australia. We have so many unique, rare, endemic, important, globally significant ecosystems. But you don't know that until you leave and then you come back and then you want to fight for it because it's not everywhere. We're just so lucky. So there is value in travel, but gosh, if you can slow down that travel, if you can, I'm hoping to sail between everywhere now. I love sailing. So obviously pairing that in would be the ideal. If anyone has a yacht, hit me up. To ride my bike wherever possible because again, I just had the most ridiculous time when I could have been flying above it all and disconnected from it all. If you can slow your travel down, you are not only going to have a way better time, and it's not everyone's option. Some people are in a rush; they don't have that choice. But again, why? Sometimes we need to go back to why are we in a rush? Is it real? Is that an illusion? And often it's by design. We're trying to squeeze so much into such a short time, and that's societally, culturally encouraged and celebrated.
We think a lot about what we lose by giving up old technologies, but also there's a lot to gain, like you were talking about, by slowing down, by changing a mode of travel that allows you to embed and connect with community and with place more deeply.
Oh, and what a place to connect with, like if you're traveling for experience, it's about the journey again. And I've loved the destinations, but my goodness, the journey has been where I've had my profoundly impactful, life-changing moments. And to be at the final destination now and to look back and reflect on the last 2 months and my body being completely adapted for this like I've just fueled on endorphins all day. Like it is the most incredible way to live, but that's a choice. And I needed to fight for it. Like I needed to ask for this. It wasn't going to happen by default. We have to be creative. And the more minds that are applying themselves to solutions here, or different ways of clothing ourselves, or different ways of, like, we are remarkably creative, remarkably resourceful, and with boundaries of choices. Like if you just say no to the job, to the source of income, the type of product, the neoprene, yes, it might be a bit more challenging to begin with, or it could also be way, way better. And I love boundaries. I love people with boundaries. If someone comes to me and they say, or ask, can we do it better? What a fantastic question. Not being passive and not being a passenger in this, because right now everything's geared for convenience and speed. It couldn't be crazier.
Yeah. But I have to.
I have to know what you used. You have to tell us what you approved as an offset for the carbon from your flight.
Sorry, missed that one. I chose a mangrove. I had the option of like a $3 offset on my flight via the, standardized flight option, or I think it was $87. And I'll get you the company, because it wasn't
Sea Trees, was it?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll find you it.
Okay.
I did
No
so
worries.
much
I'll put it in the show notes.
backlog, and I found someone that did it for a job. So
awesome.
please, show
I'm
notes.
sure lots of people will want to know what the non-greenwashed approved, like marine biologist approved way of offsetting your flights is.
Please let me get that too.
Yeah.
So we're speaking about moving slowly and, the benefits of riding your bike on a long journey like you've just completed. Though you have some records that speak to going very fast.
World records, in fact.
What is the deal? And what are you about to do in the next few days that relates to speed of that kind?
Yeah, so again, those whole limiting beliefs and rattling, like now I rock the boat intentionally, intrinsically, extrinsically, because so many of those limitations, whether they're lifestyle, whether they're conceptualized, inherited operating systems, they're not real. And while out on these roads and undertaking these experiences, I have no idea if I can do them. Like,
Really? You're not
honestly.
Are you training beforehand?
I did a little bit before this one. New Zealand, for example, I'd never ridden on a road, and I decided to ride tip to tip. So the first day was my first day on a road ever. And every day you're like...
Hold on, sorry. I just want to pause while the little puppy...
I'm a big fan of that approach. Lauren will attest to that.
Dave, that's definitely Dave's style.
Dive in, like deep end, let's go, like figure it out on the fly. I'm like excited about the talk of that. I don't want to get too off.
I've had a couple adventures very much along a similar line of moving slowly with a big group of friends on little Hobie kayak trimarans, little trimaran ones, where we've done some long trips in California and Australia. And I did one paddle on the west coast of New Zealand, North Island, New Zealand, around seabed mining. So there's a seabed mining threat, and there was a real rallying of community to stop that and to also seek greater protection for the Maui's dolphin, the Popoto dolphin, the smallest dolphin in the world.
Yeah.
There was down to 50 individuals at that point. And so I wanted to do a solo mission and just paddle, but also join up with locals and paddle that stretch of coast. And I wanted to do that because I felt like the slow-moving way of ensuring that by literally moving by the force of my own arms each day, I would come in and pretty much traverse every grain of sand of that coast that was under threat, and then hang with locals in a way where we were sort of more shoulder to shoulder. I was like, I felt how strong your waters are here.
Yes.
I felt how powerful this coastline is. I've seen how deforested it is, and New Zealand is tragically deforested. And anyway, at the end of the trip, I knew that place in a way now that it will never leave me. It is so intimate and really fun. And it also gave me a position of strength, and not authority, but strength to be able to speak for that place.
Advocate.
And really from direct experience. And if someone was to contest the nature of that place and say from the industry who was threatening it, oh, no, those waters are fine, it's not that kind of tumultuous, turbulent coastline or whatever, I could directly speak to the nature of that place. And anyway, it was just an incredible way to move through country and to actually spend relaxed time with people and have all those silly little conversations you have between surfs or cups of tea or a barbie or whatever, but that aren't silly at all. They're just, they really last, and they're very human and humanizing. The real joy for me in that too were those high octane moments, probably a shit term to use actually, but those high speed moments, right? And so I loved those thrilling moments as much as I loved the calm cruising moments where you're just coasting. So what is the deal with that part of you where you coast and you cruise and then you bomb hills and
how
you
thrilling.
have obviously a need for speed?
I think surfers get this because we chase that, it's such a thrill. And picking up a bike, like, I love the intensity, and it's all consuming. You cannot think about anything else when you're bombing down a hill. And part of the ride in New Zealand is, again, breaking down these self-limiting beliefs, and time again, you're looking at the next alpine range thinking, I've got to go over that. And I was towing a surfboard with a wetsuit that I just towed through a river, so it's 5 kilos heavier. Those kind of experiences, you're like, oh no, I forgot. And dragging that through backcountry gravel roads, just gathering dust and out there alone, and you just want to shake people. Like, where are you all? I'm the only one to witness this kind of stuff. But you put yourself in those situations through like a bit of blind confidence and the sense for wanting to live, truly live. And again, like, I could have just flown over the top of it, but that mentality of those breaking down those barriers, mostly the mental ones, and what can't I do? Like, let's test it. And the ultimate one for me was like a world record. And like, the doubt that you overcome while preparing mentally for that. I did it 100 times mentally before even getting to that start line. And interestingly, when you step at that start line, for me, and I don't know if this is advisable, it was you see it through or you break your body doing it. There's no quitting. Quitting is not on the table. And that mentality has been fully reinforced in the last few years. Like, that is how I'm choosing to attack what I do now. And whatever bar or challenge or goal, whatever you want to call it, you put in place, like that, the limit of what you can do, it just keeps moving. And that was one of the ultimate tests of it's not so much your body, but what can your mind do? And I attempted, it was the most descending on a mountain bike in 24 hours. And so there was no female record. So I was like, oh, this is an easy one. I'll just go get that. There was a minimum requirement. So that was 30,000 meters descending, which was 72 laps of a mountain that I chose to do it on.
Wow.
Crazy. I started at 8 p.m. because I wanted to get the night done first to be fresh. But I unbelievably got the female record in 13 hours. And I was like, I've still got a few hours up my sleeve. Let's go for the men's. And so I started chasing the men's record. And like the questions of, why am I doing this? Like 80 laps deep. You ask some hard-hitting questions, and the experiences you go through in a challenge like this is like 5 years of living, all condensed into 24 hours. Like the highest highs, the lowest lows, the doubt, the breaking through what you thought was possible, the connection, the bonds, the physical experience, the mental experience, and just kept going alone towards the end because everyone else fried. And fair enough, I'd been training, but no one else had. So I got the men's record after 18 hours and 54 minutes, and I did a few more laps to make 100 laps.
Wow.
But then in the last 2 hours, the heavens had opened up and it was pouring with rain. And because you're so fatigued, your balance is so compromised. And this was like a downhill record on a downhill track.
Can you talk us
please.
through? I'm not familiar with mountain biking so much. So you have a track, there's downhill, but there's uphill too. So you're having to ride uphill, or are you getting an assist on the uphill?
I got an assist.
Okay,
So I chose an area with a chairlift. And fortunately, Coronet Peak, where I did it, they sped the chairlift up. So I did all my calculations off a slower lift. They put it to 100% for me. And so that's why I was getting it done so much quicker than I calculated. And so assisted up, so I get 4 minutes of break and then you're riding back down again. Yeah. But gosh, I'll never forget like looking up at the stars, having your own private bike park and chairlift with a bunch of mates. And
why would you stop?
This is crazy.
Just keep
like
going.
I was just like laughing. Absolutely mind-blowing experience. But it's just based on what you crazy ideas you think up. And why not? And the thing is, when you're out there doing things like that, the ideas keep coming. And the next idea, I've already got so many in the backlog right now that I've got in the pipeline. But gosh, next on the list is, to do another record, because I love the challenge. I just love it. And it's not for anyone else, but I love that I put limits on myself. And they're all, again, old inherited jargon that aren't real, and breaking through those, and that way of doing it through a kind of recognized way it just gives me something to like measure it by. So I can just kind of get into my little phase and meditate through it. It's phenomenally, I can't articulate the emotion that comes through experiences like that. And there's literally, like, if you heard myself talk, it's so optimistic. It's like, it's so good. And especially after an experience, for example, like this ride, I get to operate in a profoundly positive, optimistic, energized, phenomenal environment. And I'm so protective of that. And I get into different communities and cultures along the way. In Australia, there's so many different cultures across the span. I recognise that most people are living in quite restricted structures, like 9 to 5. And a lot of people don't believe that they can make change with their voice or their actions. And so it's really such a contrast going from this mindset and environment that you intentionally create. Like, that's not by accident. It's very intentional, the language I use.
I was just reading about a parent whose child was complaining a lot. And so this parent was thinking about, how do I get my child to complain less? And they decided to explain to the child that our brains are full of these bridges, neural pathways. And the more you do a behavior, the stronger the bridges get. And when you don't behave in a certain way, like you're not being very grateful, you're not looking at the positive side of things, those bridges, those pathways get broken and they break down. And so what I hear in you is you are just building up these neural pathways of positivity. Sorry, I broke away from the example of the parent and the child. So the parent was saying, look, my precious child, let's try to practice gratitude. You've built up this habit for complaining, and so your brain is just going to keep going down that pathway. Let's try to shift it. Let's try to incorporate, when you go to complain, instead say something positive,
Absolutely.
Let's build a new bridge.
And I think we've got to be so gentle with ourselves in this, because it's like a reptilian default of ours. Our brain is absolute Teflon for like slippery stuff for positive experiences and positive interactions, but it is Velcro for negative, because that's a survival instinct. So with that inbuilt default, it needs to be intentional and almost a practice, an exercise. And while out there, even a couple of days ago in torrential rain, I found myself having that internal talk of like, this is pretty hard. Like I had drowned my phone, so I had no navigation anymore. I had no connection or safety through getting in touch with people. I'd almost been hit by a car at that stage because I'd locked up and couldn't stop in time on the greasy roads. And everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But in that, the flip of the narrative was what an adventure this is, or I've got to really earn this. Like it's not easy. And this is what I came here for. Like I came here to live, and this is living. Like this is memorable. Some of those like stretches of road where you got your head down, like I've just, it's all a blur, but I will never forget that. And time again, some of the hardest experiences are the biggest opportunities to learn and to take forward. And what you can do with the neurological wiring there, like that was a perfect flip. Like the self-awareness, and don't get me wrong, like it's not like I'm walking around smiling all day. It's like, it's not toxic positivity, but there's so much choice in how you navigate or narrate things that are often so out of your control. But that's something you can 100% control is that internal dialogue. And sometimes it's a tough shift and sometimes I can't. Like some days are just hard and that's okay too. But
do you wake up on a Velcro day and just go, I'm not getting on my bike. I'm just going to stick to this sticky Velcro negativity and have like a full, you know, like physical blah, mental blah.
Honestly, yeah. Some days, like, and that's okay.
Great.
Like to feel it and it is what it is.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't define you. Like I'm not just one behavior or one attitude.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I heard this brilliant analogy of we don't look at a tree and think all year round it should have like fruit and leaves on it. Like we're totally understanding that it has seasons, and whether that's in a day or over a period of time, it's okay. And I think having that gentle acceptance, and then if you can have that shift, God, you get better at it, you get stronger at it. And then fortunately for me, strengthening that self-belief, no matter what comes in through whether, and often it's not my voice, it's someone else's voice that's criticizing me or judging me, or like it's so interesting if you listen to the narrative. Often it's a cultural one and it's learnt and you can unlearn it. So
why now in your life? Why take on these big physical challenges now in your life? You're in your early 30s. Yeah. What about right now is driving you toward world records and stretching your physical capacity?
Really good question. It's fun. Is there a limit?
Did you have parents who modeled adventure for you?
My parents have always been so supportive. And I'm like, my mum was a breadwinner, and I remember going out into the world where Dad was to stay at home and looked after us and worked remotely, going, oh, well, this is different. People often have different roles, and then those getting projected on me, especially in the sailing world. I remember jumping on a boat and someone being like, this is my favourite food. I was like, oh, that's very
Good
presumptuous. Good, yeah. But I think having such supportive parents that I don't have an interaction where they don't tell me that I'm loved and valued and cared for. I've such a strong support network, and I have the closest knit group of friends and we just build each other up, and that's intentional, that we have a very high standard of care and love, and I don't have time for anything else. And I have such a remarkable bar, and I hold myself and others to that. So in a compassionate, loving way, like support is just key and community is key. But I think I've always been drawn to and resonated with these remote, crazy, challenging environments, like studying Antarctic sciences and buying a yacht overseas, and now full immersion into the bike world and a few big ideas. Why not, like it's there, and then the opportunity's there. Please.
You wrote, you can't take back the time you sit watching TV or scrolling through Facebook. instead of in the sun, in the arms of the one you love, or under the starriest skies. This very moment is your life. You only have one. When you go to leave this world, what will have filled your heart, moved you, or made you passionate beyond belief? For me, it's working on a cause beyond myself, wholehearted kindness, riding my bike, feeling small and humbled by nature, and appreciating every minute of it. I want to watch the sunrise, laugh until I cry, continue to challenge myself to the point of breaking, and hopefully use everything I learn along the way to make this world a better place. The most rewarding experiences I've had have been the result of intense leaps of faith that some people told me not to, but felt right anyway. Would you rather go home having tried or have to die unfulfilled? I'm not scared of trying and failing, but I'm afraid of living a life with only half my heart. So beautiful.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
I think what these experiences give you is that huge perspective and those moments that are so difficult to recreate, but by putting yourselves on that mountaintop or out on that break, and that clarity comes so impactfully deep, and then you can write something like that without hesitation, without a backspace. And that's why I do what I do. This ride, for example, when I bought a yacht, when I went to New Zealand, I could count on one hand, on a couple of fingers, people that encouraged me to do it and led with enthusiasm. Almost the other 99% of people told me their fears and gave me a warning time and time again with all of these experiences. And I understand it comes from a remarkably caring, compassionate place where they want the best for you, but it's often a projection of fear and often out of proportion. And I really, truly believe that jumping in, doing a bit of background research so you're not fully in the dark, but jumping in with both feet, you learn, and we are remarkably capable and people will gravitate to you. It's so important to have that courage. And I couldn't do what I do now without having taken those big jumps and hoping for the best. And honestly, I don't want to get too woo-woo, but you will be caught always, every time. I've had so many exceptional experiences and people are good and caring. And I wholeheartedly believe that. I've seen that. I've experienced that firsthand this entire trip. I can't encourage others enough to just jump in and have a go.
Thanks so much for listening with us today. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing an episode with a friend. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at What Are People Podcasts, and you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, whatarepeoplepodcasts.com.